Today we're going to take a look at the top 10 most common types of screws and what makes each kind unique and essential to life as we know it today. Let's dig in. I want to clarify that today we're just going to be talking about screws, not bolts. Now, a screw is characterized by the very coarse threads that cut corresponding threads into the material that they go into, whereas a bolt has a very relatively fine, even set of threads and has a corresponding thread coarseness in the nut. And a bolt and a nut work together to clamp a workpiece between them. Often there's a washer used in conjunction there, maybe some thread locker. Anyhow, we're not going to be talking about those today. I'll cover that in another segment. So, top 10 types of screws, not in any particular order. You're going to find these in a lot of applications in the modern industrial world. Deck screws. Deck screws, which these are all an example of, have a coating on them to protect the steel screw underneath. This coating is going to come in different colors just to match the aesthetics of the application that they're used in. These are most often used to hold deck boards down to the subframing of a deck. They're going to come in different drives. This is a Torx. I have a Phillips. Here's a square drive, and the drive you can get them in different types depending on your preference. Usually, there's not a ton of difference. There's one exception, and that is the Trex screw. Trex is a brand name of composite decking, which is a mix of plastic and wood. And the cool part about these, this is I'm going to say a relatively new technology, a relatively new type of screw. You're going to see here a coarse thread, and that thread is designed to grip into the wood that your deck boards are secured to. And then this upper fine set of threads, if you pay really close attention to that, you'll see that this upper set here is actually going reverse of the coarse threads here. So like any fastener, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. So these threads here go in to the right and they screw in. But these threads up here are backwards, and the reason for that is that when you're screwing down through that composite decking, it has a tendency, if you don't pre-drill it, to want to throw a little shaving up, just a little burr, and it would just look really bad and not really be very functional if this screw sunk down below the surface like it should, and then there were a little burr sticking up. It's gonna snag your socks if you're walking in your bare feet or whatever, and it's just not very nice. And you don't usually pre-drill Trex deck. So this backwards thread is designed to catch that burr and suck it down below the head of the screw and keep that burr from sticking up. Kind of a neat technology. Kind of some overview of some different screw components. If you look here, you'll see on the very end of here that there's a little notch cut in the end of the threads, and that is to help assist the screw in getting a bite in wood without having pre-drilled the wood. As I mentioned, in a lot of these applications, or some of these applications anyway that we look at, you're not going to pre-drill the wood, and so that just helps get a bite, clear a little bit of material out of the way, and start that screw where it needs to go. So we have our two types of deck screws, a standard deck screw and a composite deck screw. They're going to come in different lengths. So those are our first two. Moving on to number 3. Lag bolts. These are often going to be used in a deck application to support the structural part of the deck underneath. The threads, you can see here, there's no relief in the tip of that screw, and this particular one is a 3/8 inch diameter, so it's not going to cut its own threads very well, or it's not going to bore its way through very well on its own. You're going to want to pre-drill this, and the best way to determine that size is take pair of calipers here and measure inside those threads. So this is 17/64, so I'd go just a little smaller than that. And so for a 3/8 inch lag screw, lag bolt sometimes it's called, I'm going to use a 1/4 inch drill bit to pre-drill through that heavy framing material. You're going to be going into at the very minimum a 2-inch board, likely maybe securing two 4x4s together. It's going to be for a pretty heavy duty application to really support some weight. Most of the other screws that we're going to look at aren't designed to support any weight. This one can do that, so it's considered a structural type of screw. Moving on to number 4 is going to be a close cousin to the lag bolt, and this is going to be a modern structural lag. And it's going to be kind of a hybrid of a couple different types of screws. First off, it has this relief cut in the end to be able to get a bite on its own without having to pre-drill anything. It's made of a tougher metal than a traditional lag screw, and so it can be made a little bit smaller in diameter and still have the same strength versus these lag screws. Traditional lag bolt is made out of fairly soft metal. It has a Torx head on it. Most of this type of screw is going to have that Torx head and a very wide bearing surface. With these traditional lag bolts, you're often going to have to use that with a washer. This type here doesn't necessarily need a washer because the bottom side of the head is so big, it spreads that weight out. It's going to pull into the wood a little bit, but it's not going to pull its way the whole way through. So these are super handy. These are not cheap. Some of these are started $1 a piece for the short ones. This is, what's this, probably a 5-inch screw. You can get these as short as 1 inch, and I've seen them as long as 16 inches. They're not cheap, but they're a modern innovation that really makes the construction process go a lot faster. Numbers 5 and 6 are going to be some sheet metal screws. Let's zoom in here and get a really good shot of these. So we have two main types here. We have self-drilling and self-tapping. Now, we saw here on our wood screws this relief that we talked about. Well, that relief is going to come in the form of a miniature drill bit on the end of each one of these screws. And so you can go into some pretty thick metal. I've drilled these into as heavy as, I think, maybe 3/16 or 1/4 of an inch mild steel, and they'll go without pre-drilling anything. Usually if I need to secure, say, a handle or maybe a real lightweight tie down onto a trailer, trailer decking is used, is fastened down using this type of screw. It would have a little bit different head on it, but it's going to have a relatively coarse set of threads, more fine than a wood screw, but a little coarser than a bolt. And then it's going to have this drill bit tip on the front. And then this other type is a sheet metal screw, but there is no relief cut in the end of there. So that's going to need to be pre-drilled with a small pilot hole. The pilot hole doesn't have to be big at all, but it's going to need something small to get through there. This type of screw you might often find used also with plastics to hold any kind of plastics together, and you know, plastics are everywhere. The camera I'm filming this on likely has a miniature version of this screw holding some of the plastic housing together. Let's move on from that. Number 7 is a drywall screw. These are all around you, but you never see them. The drywall in the building and the room that you're in right now was likely installed using drywall screws. If they went into wood studs, they would have a very coarse thread here. If they went into metal studs, which is more common in commercial and industrial framing applications, they would have a finer set of threads to punch through, and the fine threads would grip into the metal stud a little bit better. There is no relief cut here. Usually these are just going to go through a layer of 1/2 or 5/8 inch drywall and then hold the drywall to the ceiling or the wall studs. And there's not going to be a ton of weight here. Typically, in a lot of applications, drywall is glued in place, and these are just used to hold the drywall in place till the glue sets up. They're really cheap. They rust really quickly if you leave them out in the weather. They're not very strong. If you try to run a big one in here to a piece of wood, it's going to break off on you. Actually, let's take a look at that. Let's take a look at a cousin screw, a sister screw to this one, that sometimes people use them interchangeably when maybe it's not best to. A drywall screw is just to hold drywall up. There's not that much of a load on it. This is you might call this a construction screw. It looks very similar to a drywall screw. This one has a Torx head, takes a Torx driver. Some of them take a Phillips driver. They're coated in this gold coating, and I would say as far as weather resistance, we have a couple different types of screws here that all look the same. Remember, this is our deck screw, which has that polymer coating on it, our drywall screw, and our gold coated construction screw. So I would say the drywall screw is going to be the least weather resistant. It's going to rust the quickest, the fastest. And then this gold coated construction screw is going to have some weather resistance. It's going to hold up moderately, but not great. And then this polymer coated deck screw is going to have the highest weather resistance, going to rust the slowest. So looking at our construction screw again, these are going to be used to hold framing members together in a house, you know, 2x4 to 2x4, things of that nature. Nails are often used. This is going to hold a little bit better than a nail if you need some pull-out resistance. But sometimes I keep these around a good bit for just random shop projects. I use this kind of screw for everything. Let's do a fun little test here. I've got these two screws, and if you go to buy a pack of screws and you're trying to build a collection, you're going to see the price of these drywall screws and you're going to say, man, I need to go with that. I'm not going to waste my money on these better ones. Let me show you here why it might not be a bad idea to spend a little bit more money. I'm going to run one of these full-length screws. What are these, 3 inches? I'm going to grab my impact driver, put a Phillips bit on that, and I'm going to run it in lengthwise into this 2x6. I'm going to put a washer on it, and we're going to see whether it strips out the wood or whether this head breaks off. My prediction is that the head will actually break off of this. So I'm going to just start this in here. This is a drywall screw going into the side of a 2x6. Turn it on its side here. Let me grab another block to set this up on so I have good access to everything. Let's see what happens here. All right, so we're in all the way. I'm going to keep on taking it in and see what happens. Well, the heatful Phillips screw head just wants to jump out. Let me put a little bit more pressure on this. Oh, we'll get started in there. There we go. Well, today it's actually not stripping out. I can't take it any tighter because it has this Phillips head. But I have had experiences before where this the head of the screw will just pop right off, or you'll get it halfway in. Maybe this is some fir wood, some fairly soft wood. If you try to use these things in oak, they'll snap off in a heartbeat. Let me grab another washer here. We'll try that same experiment with a construction screw. I think we have a little bit different experience. We're going to put our Torx bit in here. And we're not really talking about the driver styles today, but man, Torx is one of the best. There we go. Got that started in there. Let's turn it on its side. All right, so we're in the whole way, and I'm just going to keep going. Wow, you can see the smoke there. There's a lot of energy being dissipated. So I was able to strip the threads out in the wood. See, it'll just keep on spinning. Let me back it out. This thing is smoldering hot. But that Torx head allowed me to keep taking that screw tighter, and the threads stripped out before the screw actually broke. And I've never had experience with this type of screw breaking before. So it's worth it to spend the extra money on a screw that's not going to break on you, not going to get you hurt. All right, let's move on. That was number 8. Let's move on to number 9. Let's get our mess out of the way here. The Tapcon. This is Tapcon is a brand name of concrete screw, and you're going to need to pre-drill for these. You're not going to be able to go straight into concrete without pre-drilling. Let me grab a bit and show you what that looks like in my organizer here. This bit here. You'll see a concrete bit looks like this. See how it's got those little ears kind of on it, and it's not sharp. If you were to look at a metal bit, this edge here is kind of sharp and really cuts into the metal or cuts into the wood. A concrete bit is used in conjunction with a hammer drill, and it kind of just pulverizes the concrete. It makes about 100 beats per second into the concrete as it's going around, just kind of pulverizes a hole straight through and pulls the dust out. So you're going to want to run this through, and then use your Tapcon to hold, maybe you're holding a base plate of a wall down to a slab. maybe you're holding, you know, a lath on the side of a concrete building. The uses are endless. And again, this blue coating is going to be very similar to the deck screws that we looked at. It's really going to hold up to the weather very well. And finally, number 10, here we have some good old wood screws. Just as the name implies, these screws are really good at holding wood together. You'll see that there's no relief cut in the very tip there. There's no kind of mechanism to get a bite into wood. You're going to want to pre-drill anytime you're using these. The best way to do that is there's a little drill bit contraption. You can buy it probably Lowe's or Home Depot that has a small pilot drill, and then on the top of that drill bit it has one of these countersink bits, or a smaller version of it, so that way in one motion you can pre-drill and cut your countersink relief so that when you put the screw in, it rests below the surface of the workpiece without tearing up any of the fibers of the wood. This one is a zinc or galvanized coated, which can stand up to some weather resistance, but you know, it's not gonna be as good as, say, a polymer coated screw. I honestly don't use these a whole lot. I have some longer ones here that I'll use sometimes for maybe a furniture repair. I also have a set of brass screws around that are very similar to this that I'll use for furniture repair, but you don't in the applications I use anyway, in more rough contexts, I don't use these a whole lot. I try to keep around some of these shorter ones, 1/2 and 3/4 inches long, that are really good for securing maybe a drawer pull onto something I've built, or maybe a caster on the bottom of a cabinet. But for my application anyway, I don't use these quite often, but they definitely have their place. Now I want to hear from you. Drop me a note down below in the comments. Let me know which of the screws we talked about today you use most often in your hobby or trade. And finally, if you enjoy learning how the world works and how to fix it when it doesn't, hit subscribe, tap that bell. We'll see you guys back for the next video.